Hey guys, it's Heather here with Underwater Panther, and I am now in the generation series on my YouTube. We are in the Millennials generation, that is also known as Generation Y, and the dates are 1981 through 1996. So, we are going to be speaking about relationships, marriage, and gender roles. What the hell happened to the millennials with their polarity collapse? Yes, the crazy millennials. What is wrong with us? All right, so I'm going to attempt to keep this video a little bit bigger. I'm not sure which you guys prefer, but here we are. All right, so I am still new to OBS Studio, and so I have been playing with it. I don't feel like playing with it too much tonight. It is what it is right now. So I am listening to music. I'm not actually listening back to myself. So, yeah, fun times. All right, so let's get into it. All right, so chapter purpose to explain why millennials struggle with intimacy, not because they fear commitment, but because they were raised inside collapsing social contracts while being asked to emotionally self regulate without stable roles, timelines, or institutions. Introduction. Love after the map disappeared. All right. So millennials were not afraid of commitment. They were afraid of committing inside a system that kept changing the rules. We were raised on stories of permanence, marriage as stability, gender roles as guidance, love as a lifelong arc with recognizable milestones. But by the time we were old enough to enter those structures ourselves, the institutions that once held them together were already unraveling. Divorce was normalized before we had language for grief. Dual income households replaced single provider models without renegotiating care. Gender expectations loosened without being retaught. Dating became optional, then competitive, then algorithmic. Marriage shifted from necessity to preference without becoming simpler. So millennials didn't inherit a relationship system. We inherited its aftermath. What replaced it was not freedom, at least not at first. It was ambiguity, no shared timelines, no clear roles, no economic floor, no cultural consensus on who owns what to whom. And yet, millennials were still asked to emotionally self regulate, communicate perfectly, heal their trauma, split labor fairly, maintain attraction, and build long term intimacy, all while navigating unstable work, rising costs, and accelerating technology. This chapter is not about blaming men, women, apps, or culture. It is about naming a structural truth. Millennials are the first generation asked to build intimacy without a stable social contract. Oh, I don't want to trigger people. This is a very heavy topic right now. It has been a very heavy topic for the last 4 years, I've noticed. I follow a whole heck of a lot of female influencers here on YouTube. Some spiritual, some not, some haters, some not. I am not an extreme person. I'm very middle grounded. Yeah, I don't subscribe to the huge extreme pendulum swings. I just want to name what's going on and why it happened. And you can choose and make your own decisions from there. I am a human being myself, obviously a woman. I have my own opinions, but I don't want to, really bring that to the table. I am just trying to bring information to the table. Oh my God, I love this song. All right, so when the relationship contract collapsed, for modern history, intimate relationships were held together by external structures. Economic necessity, gendered labor roles, religious or cultural obligation, community enforcement, and limited choice. Love mattered, but it was not required to carry the entire system. By contrast, millennials entered adulthood after those structures weakened or disappeared, but before new ones were ever consciously built. Marriage stopped being a default before becoming safe. Gender roles dissolved before being replaced with sustainable alternatives. Choice expanded faster than meaning. Freedom arrived without scaffolding. As a result, intimacy was forced to absorb pressures it was never designed to hold alone. Financially, instability, identity formation, emotional healing, sexual fulfillment, and self actualization. The relationship didn't just become romantic, it became therapeutic, economic, sexual, emotional, and existential, all at once. This is not a personal failure, it is a systems overload. The old contract, what millennials were taught relationships were. Before the collapse, there was a model, imperfect, restrictive, but coherent. Millennials were raised watching marriage as an economic container, clearly divided gender labor even when unequal, predictable milestones, date, marry, house, and children, community reinforcement of long-term bonds. Even as divorce rates rose, the idea of permanence still dominated cultural storytelling. Relationships had roles, timelines, expectations, and consequences. Love was not optional, but neither was structure. This matters because nervous systems develop around predictability, not perfection. By the time millennials reached adolescence, however, cracks in the contract were visible. Emotional labor was rising without recognition, dual income stress increased. Women were asked to have it all without support. Men were asked to redefine masculinity without guidance. Intimacy was idealized while institutions retreated. The old map was still being taught, but it no longer matched the terrain. Millennials didn't just didn't reject it out of rebellion. They discovered it didn't work and were given no replacement. Gosh, my throat's really been screwed up last couple days. I apologize. All right, so what comes next? Era 1 containment without choice, 1981 through the early 1990s. Era 2 transition without instruction. Era 3 collapse without replacement. And Era 4 algorithmic mediation. Then we layer gender role disorientation, attachment outcomes, dating apps as nervous system environments, and millennial versus Gen Z contrast. So, Era 1 containment without choice. 1981 through the early 1990s. Millennials were born into a relationship system that still had walls. Those walls were not gentle. They were not fair, but they were structural. In early millennial childhood, relationships were still organized around containment. Marriage as an economic container, gender roles as labor containers, family as a default unit of survival, community and religion as enforcement mechanisms. Love was important, but it was not expected to hold everything together. That distinction matters. I'm going to clear my throat. Give me one second. Sorry, I'm like super struggling. All right, so the relationship environment millennials entered. In the 1980s and early 1990s, millennials observed relationships that were long term by default, reinforced by financial necessity, stabilized by gendered expectations, difficult to exit even when unhappy. Divorce existed, but it was still framed as failure, not permanence. Single parent households existed, but were treated as exceptions, not norms. Adults around millennials often stayed together because separation was economically dangerous, gender roles were rigid but legible, community judgment mattered, timelines were socially enforced. This created an environment where relationships endured even when intimacy suffered. And while the model caused harm, especially to women, it also provided something millennials would later miss: predictability. You're telling me. Gender roles as stabilizers, not justice. Gender roles as the era were not equitable, but they were clear. Men were socialized towards provision, authority, emotional restriction, external validation through work. Women were socialized towards caretaking, emotional labor, relational maintenance, internal regulation of family systems. These roles were constrained identity, but they also reduced ambiguity. You knew who was responsible for what was expected, what failure looked like, what success looked like. This matters because nervous systems regulate more easily inside clear constraints than inside infinite choice. Millennials absorbed this clarity before it disappeared. Marriage is infrastructure, not fulfillment. In Era 1, marriage was not primarily framed as soul fulfillment, emotional healing, sexual compatibility, or personal growth. It was framed as adulthood, responsibility, stability, and endurance. Love was assumed to grow inside the container, not replace it. That model was deeply flawed, but it did not ask intimacy to perform impossible tasks. The unspoken training millennials received. As children, millennials learned without being told that relationships were durable, roles were defined, conflict was contained, permanence mattered more than happiness. Even when homes were unhappy, the structure itself was consistent. This trained early millennial nervous systems to expect continuity, endurance, long arcs, and delayed gratification in intimacy. And that expectation would later collide violently with reality. The hidden cost already present. Even in Era 1, cracks were visible. Emotional needs went unmet. Women absorbed invisible labor. Men were cut off from vulnerability. And children sensed tension without language. But the system still held, and holding, even imperfectly, matters during development. Millennial imprint from Era 1. By the time millennials reached adolescence, their nervous systems carried an imprint that would later create friction. Relationships are supposed to last, roles are supposed to orient behavior, leaving is serious, and stability matters. The tragedy is not that this model was perfect, it's that it collapsed before a new one was built. Millennials did not rebel against containment. They grew up expecting it and then discovered it no longer existed. Millennials were formed inside relationship structures that endured and that entered adulthood just as those structures dissolved. Gender roles began to fracture. The container weakens before the map is redrawn. So, bridge between Era 1 and Era 2. The first to break was not marriage, it was gender coherence. As millennials move through childhood into adolescence, the roles that once stabilized relationships began to loosen, not through consensus, but through pressure. Economic reality changed faster than cultural instruction. Women entered the workforce in greater numbers, not as liberation alone, but as necessity. Men were no longer guaranteed provider status without being taught alternative sources of worth. Dual income households became normal without renegotiating care, emotional labor, or time. The container thinned, but no one stopped to explain what was supposed to replace it. The double bind millennials missed. Millennials watched adults live inside contradiction. Women were told to be independent, be nurturing, succeed professionally, maintain the household, and regulate everyone's emotions. Men were told to be sensitive, be strong, adapt, but don't lose authority. Don't become less masculine. Neither side was given a workable model. Roles loosened, but expectations multiplied. What had once been unfair but legible became fair in theory and chaotic in practice. This is actually driving me nuts. I've got to make this a little bit smaller. I just don't know where to put my my video. I apologize. All right, so children do not need perfect systems, they need predictable ones. Millennials did not grow up watching gender roles collapse cleanly. They grew up watching adults improvise under strain. This trained a subtle but lasting imprint. Relationships require constant negotiation, roles are unstable, and someone will end up over functioning. That imprint sets the stage for everything that followed. The relationship container didn't shatter yet, but it started to leak. The polarity collapse. When masculine and feminine became a war zone instead of a dance. Millennials didn't just lose a relationship contract, they lost the polarity container that made attraction feel safe. Because polarity isn't traditional roles. Polarity is a nervous system's ability to trust complementary energy. Masculine function in its healthy form is containment, direction, protection, provision, steadiness, initiation, repair through action. Feminine function in its healthy form is receptivity, responsiveness, emotional attunement, relational intelligence, life force, erotic openness, and repair through connection. When those functions collapse, attraction doesn't disappear, it mutates. It becomes power games instead of desire, performance instead of presence, suspicion instead of surrender, control instead of devotion, talking about feelings instead of embodied safety. Millennials were the first generation to enter adulthood where masculine authority was publicly discredited while feminine safety was privately compromised at the exact same time. So polarity didn't evolve, it broke. Not because men are bad or women are broken, but because trust dissolved on both sides. Polarity breakdown by era. What each phase did to attraction, trust, and gender energy. Era 1, 1981 through the early 1990s. Polarity with coercion. Containment existed, but it wasn't always kind. Masculine energy equals provider and authority, but often emotionally unavailable or rigid. Feminine energy equals caretaking, but often overburdened, undervalued, and resentful. The relationship stayed together because the system enforced it. Polarity felt real because rules were defined, but it often came with a hidden wound. Men learned feelings are weakness and worth equals work. Women learned love requires self erasure and stability requires compliance. Result attraction existed, but it wasn't necessarily safe. Bridge early to mid 1990s. The feminine awakens and the masculine loses a map. This is where the fracture sharpens. Women were told to be everything: career, mother, beautiful, emotionally evolved. Men were told change, be sensitive, and egalitarian without a stable model of what earned respect now. So, two things happened simultaneously: feminine mistrust, if I rely on you, I'll pay, and masculine shame, if I'm not winning, I am nothing. Polarity begins to invert. So important. I can't stand people that just get on here and tell their sob stories and I hate this person, I hate that person. Like, it's like that doesn't really help. It's nice to learn pointers on what to look out for red flags, but that's like the aftermath. I prefer to excavate and study the bones and understand what caused the tragedy to begin with. Like, how did we get here? How did we get here? Origins. I'm so freaking interested in architecture and origins. Those are my jam. All right, so polarity begins to invert. Women initiate, plan, manage, and carry relational labor. Men retreat, defer, or numb out. Not always from malice, but from disorientation. This is the origin of the millennial polarity wound. Women feel alone inside relationships, and men feel inadequate before they even begin. Era 2, mid 1990s through the early 2000s, polarity without training. Freedom expands and guidance disappears. Dating becomes experimental with no shared scripts. Sex becomes available without containment, and emotional needs intensify without repair models. Two nervous system adaptations form: feminine energy over functioning, hypercompetence, and control as safety. Masculine strategy is disengagement, avoidance, and withdrawal as self protection. And the communication revolution begins. Millennials start trying to talk their way into safety because no structure holds it anymore. Result: polarity becomes negotiation instead of magnetism. I personally, I don't want to get into personal stuff. Never mind, just kidding. I'm trying. I'm being good. All right. So, anywho, era 2 transition without instruction. Mid 1990s to the early 2000s. Era 2 is where millennials learned most destabilizing relationship lesson of all. Change was happening, but no one was teaching how to live inside it. The relationship landscape shifts. By the mid to late 1990s, millennials were adolescents in a social environment defined by transition. Divorce rates normalized, blended families increased, single parent households expanded, women's economic participation rose sharply, and men's traditional pathways narrowed. Yet cultural storytelling lagged behind reality. Movies still promised soulmates. Don't get me started on Disney princess crap. My Disney princess was Xena, the warrior princess. That was my princess. Like, come on now. Movies still promised soulmates. Religion still preached permanence. Schools still taught abstinence or silence. Families still modeled endurance even as they struggled. The map no longer matched the terrain. Dating becomes experimental, not guided. For the first time in modern history, large numbers of young people were allowed to date without marriage expectation, sexually active without long term frameworks, emotionally bonded without social scaffolding. But there were no shared scripts. No consensus on when commitment should happen, what serious meant, how long to try before leaving, what obligations intimacy created. There's no such thing as boyfriend and girlfriend, by the way. There, I said it. I feel so much better now. That is not an effing title. Don't believe it. All right. Choice expanded faster than meaning. Freedom arrived before wisdom. Technology enters the relationship field quietly. Era 2 is also when early technology began reshaping intimacy without yet being blamed for it. So I am going to go harder on my polarity, masculine and feminine, toxic series. I have a toxic series of the masculine and feminine. I certainly want to do I'm going to add to that series, but that's where I go in harder. This isn't the series for that. So I'm trying so hard to be light because that's not where I'm at right now. So, Era 2 is also when early technology began reshaping intimacy without yet being blamed for it. Landlines gave way to early cell phones, AIM and texting introduced partial availability. Silence became ambiguous instead of neutral, and presence became legible online versus away. For the first time, someone could ignore you without explanation, connection could exist without co presence, and attachment cues became intermittent. This subtly rewired expectations. Relationships no longer lived only in shared time, they began living in response patterns. Emotional labor becomes invisible and everywhere. As roles loosened, emotional labor expanded without being named. Millennials learned that talking about feelings mattered, but knowing what to do with them did not come automatically. Communication was emphasized, repair was not taught. This is where many millennials internalized a dangerous belief. If I explain myself well enough, the relationship should work. When it didn't, blame turned inward. The core experience of Era 2. Era 2 did not feel like collapse, it felt like confusion masked as freedom. Millennials were told you have more options than ever. You can choose your own path. You don't have to repeat the past. But they were not told how to build stability without roles, how to leave without trauma, how to stay without self erasure, how to negotiate desire, safety, and future at the same time. They were given autonomy without orientation. Millennial imprint from Era 2. By the early 2000s, millennials carried a new relational imprint. Love requires constant work, roles negotiable but exhausting. Excuse me, staying is optional but leaving is destabilizing. I must monitor the relationship at all times. This is where hypercommunication begins. Overfunctioning becomes common, ambiguity becomes anxiety, not because millennials are insecure, because these systems stopped holding them. Millennials entered adolescence during a transition where roles dissolved, choices multiplied, and no one taught how to build intimacy without the old container. Era 3 collapsed without replacement. 2001 to 2012. This is where millennials stopped believing that intimacy would. Excuse me, I gotta. I had something in my mouth. Sorry, it was like stuck on my lip gloss too. Era 3 is where millennials stopped believing that intimacy would be caught by anything outside the relationship itself because everything else fell away at once. This era did not introduce instability, it confirmed it. 9/11, the moment safety became conditional. For millennials, 9/11 was not just a geopolitical event, it was a relational shock. Those who were children or early adolescents on September 11th, 2001 were old enough to I was actually 11. I said 12 in the other video. I was 11. I suck at math. So those who were children or early adolescents on September 11, 2001 were old enough to feel fear, sense adult panic, and watch authority fail in real time, but too young to contextualize it, influence outcomes, or protect themselves. The emotional lesson absorbed was simple and permanent. The world can change instantly, and the structures meant to protect us may not. This matters for intimacy because safety is the foundation of bonding. After 9/11, fear entered daily life, trust in institutions cracked, permanence felt naive, the future stopped feeling guaranteed. Relationships became emotional shelters, but unstable ones. Economic instability enters the relationship core. As millennials move from the adolescence into early adulthood, economic instability stopped being theoretical. Wages stagnated, debt rose, housing costs increased, and job security eroded. The old relationship contract, build together and you'll be safe, no longer held. Never be a Barbara the Builder. Ever. Don't do it. Marriage stopped functioning as an economic stabilizer. It became a financial risk. This quietly altered dating behavior, commitment delayed, cohabitation without marriage increased. Don't do it. Never move in. You women out there, never move in with a man you are not married to. Never, ever, ever. I mean, I am just trying so hard to keep my lips zipped, but oh my God, please don't do it. It's your life, but I highly suggest that you never move in with a man without marriage. All right, so timelines dissolved, waiting until things stabilize became permanent. This is just a whole different world out here, and your mistakes will cost you a lot more now than they used to in the past. And that is just my biggest warning to you women. Your mistakes now will cost you more than they did in the past. So, I mean, yes, we're making more money. I get that. But it's also more expensive to live nowadays. Just think about it. All right, so choice expands, containment disappears. Era 3 is also when choice exploded without containment. Dating sites expanded access without guidance. Online profiles replaced social vetting. Attraction became sortable. Commitment became optional. Early apps and platforms did not yet dominate, but they changed the logic. People became browsable, comparable, and replaceable. This altered how millennials experienced bonding. I don't have Facebook. I don't do any apps. The only social platform I am on is YouTube, and that is for business purposes. I don't do social apps. I am just like, I don't suggest stay off the freaking dating apps. Don't do it. This is just a dog eat dog world out there. And I am reverting back to a more Amish lifestyle. Like, I am not playing games in this day and age. Attachment no longer developed inside scarcity and proximity, it developed inside perceived abundance. And abundance undermines tolerance for friction. Gender roles fully detach without support. By era 3, gender roles had fully loosened, but no shared replacement had emerged. Women were expected to be independent, emotionally literate, sexually autonomous, and relationally flexible. Men were expected to be emotionally available, economically viable, non dominant but confident, and supportive but decisive. Everyone was expected to communicate perfectly, heal childhood wounds, self regulate triggers, and maintain attraction indefinitely. No one was taught how, but no one was taught how. This produced a new imbalance. Emotional labor surged, boundaries blurred, resentment accumulated quickly. or quietly and quickly, honest to goodness. Relationships became work, but not shared work. I'm being good. Intimacy absorbs everything else. By the late 2000s, millennials were unconsciously asking romantic relationships to do what institutions no longer did. Institutions, marriage, church, institutions mean a lot of different things. Contracts. So, institutions no longer provided safety, meaning, economic reassurance, emotional regulation, identity confirmation. That also institutions can be your network with your family. We are working a hell of a lot more now because we all have to, less time with family. This is too much pressure for intimacy to bear. And when relationships failed under the weight, millennials blame themselves, not the conditions. Oh, okay, so I do break down institutions. Just in case you were like, "What?" What institutions means here. Institutions doesn't mean just government, it means the big external structures that used to carry life, stability, so intimacy didn't have to. So it represents stable employment systems, marriage as economic contract, extended family and community networks, religion, shared moral frameworks, predictable career and life timelines, affordable housing and education, and social enforcement of responsibility. These used to absorb risk. By the time millennials entered adulthood, they didn't. So number 1, provide safety before. So they no longer provide safety. Safety before came from long-term employment, pensions, affordable housing, strong labor protections, and community accountability. For millennials, jobs became contingent and unstable, layoffs normalized, benefits disappeared, housing became speculative. God, I feel so terrible for the younger generations. Um I mean, like, I make good money and I just can't even I feel sorry for people. I really truly do. I do not know how they're gonna make it in this world. It's, like, impossible almost. I'm pretty pessimistic, I'm not gonna lie. I am a Capricorn stellium, I have an Aquarian mind. My only optimism within me is my Aries rising and my Pisces Venus. But I mean, I'm a very, like, happy person. That's my baseline, but I'm extremely pessimistic. I'm just very concerned about the younger generations and relationships and where we are headed in all directions. I am extremely concerned. Gracious. All right, so healthcare tied to employment or debt. Result, safety became personal, not structural, so people unconsciously looked to partners to feel safe. Provide meaning. So before, meaning came from religion, civic identity, stable roles, provider, caregiver, and elder, and predictable life arcs. For millennials, religion lost authority, national identity fractured, work became transactional, and roles dissolved without replacement. Result, romantic relationships were asked to provide existential meaning. You should make my life feel purposeful. That's an impossible burden. Provide economic reassurance before marriage itself was economic. Pooled labor, predictable costs, social pressure to provide, and long term planning made sense. For millennials, marriage stopped guaranteeing stability. Debt followed people into relationships. Children became financially terrifying. Divorce became economically catastrophic. Result, partners were expected to calm financial fear even when they couldn't. This produced delayed commitment, power struggles, hoarding, financially masculine. Avoidance masked as independence. Provide emotional regulation before. Emotional regulation was distributed between family networks, churches, gender roles, flawed but regulating, and community norms. For millennials, families fragmented, communities weakened, therapy language rose without structural support, and everyone was told to self regulate. Result, partners became therapists, regulators, and emotional shock absorbers, which exhausts intimacy. Provide identity confirmation. Before, identity came from role, class, family, position, and long term contribution. For millennials, identity became fluid. Work stopped defining worth. Social media externalized validation, and instability made selfhood shaky. Result, relationships were asked, tell me who I am. Am I enough? Am I chosen? That pressure destroys attraction over time. When institutions stopped absorbing risk, intimacy inherited the load. Romantic relationships were unconsciously expected to become the safety net, meaning system, economic stabilizer, emotional regulator, and identity anchor. No relationship can survive being asked to do all of that. So when relationships broke, millennials blamed themselves. I'm bad at commitment. I'm avoidant. I'm anxious. I picked wrong. Instead of seeing the truth, the conditions were unsustainable. Emotional tone of Era 3. Era 3 did not feel chaotic on the surface. It felt cautious, delayed, non committal, and quietly anxious. People still dated, people still loved, people still hoped, but underneath was a constant calculation. Is this safe enough to invest in? What if everything collapses again? What if I choose wrong and there's no recovery? Love became high stakes in a low trust world. Millennial imprint from Era 3. By the end of this era, millennials carried a deeply internalized imprint. Nothing is guaranteed. I must protect myself while staying open. Leaving is easier than repairing, but lonelier, and commitment requires certainty that no longer exists. This is where avoidance strategies increase, anxious monitoring increases, situationships begin. Ooh, don't get me started. God, the situationships, living with a man and going 50-50, that is absolutely effing crazy. Crazy. Burnout replaces romance. Not because millennials don't value love, but because love was asked to survive collapse without support. Millennials entered adulthood during a period where safety, economy, and identity destabilized simultaneously, forcing intimacy to carry more weight than it was ever designed to hold. Era 3, 2001 through 2012, polarity under threat. 9/11 plus economic instability plus pornification plus early online dating equals mistrust hardens. This era puts masculinity and femininity into survival mode. Masculine energy gets economically undermined, status instability, debt, and job insecurity. Feminine energy gets relationally undermined, hookup culture, safety issues, and emotional labor inflation. And then a huge quiet factor. Sexual conditioning accelerates. Porn and hypersexual media increasingly teach arousal without attachment. No, not morally, neurologically. That alters expectations. Novelty over devotion, performance over presence, conquest over intimacy, and stimulation over connection. Feminine wound deepens. I'm being used, compared, and replaced. The masculine wound deepens. I can't measure up. I'd rather not try. Result, distrust becomes default. Era 4, algorithmic mediation. 2013 to present. Era 4 is not when dating got worse. It's when intimacy stopped being mediated by humans and started being mediated by systems optimized for engagement, not bonding. This is the era where relationships became interfaces. The shift from meeting people to browsing them. Before Era 4, even unstable dating environments still involved social context, shared spaces, mutual accountability, and friction before access. Dating apps removed friction entirely. I just want to throw up. I just want to throw up. Like, I hate society. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to lie, man. I'm opting out. I've already opted out. I am happy on the farm. This is what I do for fun. And I feel very sorry for y'all because I'm extremely introverted and I can survive. I can survive. All I need is peace, and I'm good. Good to go. All right, so people became profiles, metrics, sortable preferences, and swipeable inventory. Choice expanded beyond cognitive capacity without it adding discernment. This did not create freedom, it created evaluation fatigue. Choice overload replaces commitment. Algorithmic dating trained a new relational reflex. If this isn't working perfectly, there might be someone better one swipe away. The grass is always greener. Oh, God. This belief doesn't require selfishness, it requires options without cost. Da-na-na. Why do you think men are being awful? Honest to God, women, honestly, why do you think men are being so awful? They just don't have consequences anymore. Of course, they're going to extract and abuse more. Are you kidding me? This belief doesn't require selfishness. It requires options without cost. The nervous system adapts by delaying investment, minimizing vulnerability, avoiding repair, and keeping exits open. Of course, one foot in, one foot out. There's always options. Not because people don't care, but because commitment now feels irrational inside perceived abundance. Disposability enters the attachment system. I'm triggering myself. One of the most damaging shifts of Era 4 is disposability. Conversations end without closure. I fight with myself in my own head. Is there really closure? I bounce back and forth with that. I'm more on the side of there is no such thing as closure. But, I mean, you can be cordial. Matches disappear without explanation. Interest fluctuates algorithmically. Rejection becomes silent. This trains the nervous system to expect sudden loss, ambiguous endings, low accountability, and emotional whiplash. Yeah, I'm good with emotional whiplash. I would rather integrate, which reinforces anxious monitoring, avoidant withdrawal, hyperverbal clarification attempts, and overfunctioning repair efforts. Era 4 didn't create attachment issues, it amplified the ones already formed in Era 1 through 3. Performance replaces presence. Dating apps and social platforms subtly shift intimacy from who are you with me to how are you perceived. The performance, the fake performance of this world drives me absolutely insane. Attraction becomes image based, optimized, and comparative. This creates self objectification, fear of aging, pressure to remain marketable, and anxiety around exclusivity. Presence gives way to performance. The gendered impact, quiet but real. Algorithmic mediation does not affect everyone equally. Women often experience attention saturation, exhaustion, distrust, and withdrawal. Men often experience attention scarcity, discouragement, resentment, and avoidance. I have so many things that want to just come out. Both outcomes undermine bonding, not because one group is wrong, but because the system distributes validation unevenly while pretending it's neutral. Intimacy becomes high effort, low security. By era 4, millennials are often emotionally literate, self aware, therapy informed, and boundary conscious, and still struggling to form lasting bonds. Why? Because intimacy now requires vulnerability without assurance, effort without reciprocity guarantees, repair without shared expectations, and trust inside disposability. This is not a skill problem, this is an environmental problem. Why millennials feel done but aren't. Many millennials reach a point of exhaustion where they say, I'm tired of dating. I don't have the energy anymore. It shouldn't be this hard. What they're responding to is not love, it's constant relational evaluation. Their nervous systems are tired of being assessed, assessing others, holding ambiguity, and performing openness without containment. They aren't closed, they are burned out from bonding inside algorithms. Millennial imprint from era 4. By now, many millennials carry a final relational imprint. Connection is possible but fragile. Effort is high and security is low. Repair feels optional to others. I must protect my energy. This leads to withdrawal masked as self care, independence framed as maturity, longing without pursuit, and intimacy delayed indefinitely. Not because millennials don't want love, but because the systems surrounding love no longer support it. Algorithmic dating didn't make millennials disposable. It taught them to experience intimacy inside systems that treat people as replaceable. Era 4, 2013 to present. Polarity in the marketplace. Algorithms turn mating into metrics. Dating apps don't just change access, they change meaning. They convert attraction into a feed, humans into options, commitment into a loss of opportunity, rejection into silence, and worth into response rate. This attacks polarity at the root because polarity requires safety and focus. This attacks polarity at the root because polarity requires safety and focus. Apps train the opposite: endless scanning, low investment, quick replacement, constant comparison, soft dehumanization. Feminine response, saturation, withdrawal, I'm tired. Masculine response, scarcity, resentment, I'm invisible. Then the war narratives move in. Men are trash, women are hypergamous. Commitment is a trap. Modern dating is rigged. Even when people don't believe these consciously, the nervous system absorbs the vibe. Trust is risky, everyone is optimizing. Result: attraction survives, but intimacy collapses. Attachment under acceleration. How bonding changed when time, safety, and structure collapsed. Millennials did not develop insecure attachment because they were poorly loved. They developed adaptive attachment strategies inside an environment that stopped being reliable. Attachment theory is often taught as a personal or familial issue. For millennials, it is more accurate to describe it as contextual. Bonding did not change because people became worse at love. It changed because time accelerated, safety destabilized, roles dissolved, exits multiplied, and repair lost shared scripts. Attachment to function inside uncertainty, and it adapted accordingly. What follows are not diagnosis, they are strategies that made sense at the time. Polarity looks like when it breaks. I knew this was going to be a long video. All right. So, what polarity looks like when it breaks. The 4 millennial failure modes. Number 1, feminine becomes control, not because she's controlling, because she's the only adult in the room. She leads, plans, monitors, and eventually can't desire what she has to manage. Number 2, masculine becomes avoidance, not because he doesn't care, because he feels behind, ashamed, or judged. So he withdraws, numbs, games, scrolls, or keeps options open. Sex becomes disassociated. Hookups, situationships, porn scripts, performance anxiety, comparison culture. Bodies connect while hearts stay armored. Number 4, communication becomes a substitute for safety. Hyperverbal processing replaces consistent repair. Talking becomes an attempt to create structure with words. This is why millennials often have high emotional intelligence, high therapy literacy, high standards, and still feel lonely as hell. Because polarity requires trust, steadiness, safety, focus, and the environment trained the opposite. Shadow. Spiritualized equality plus erotic distrust plus the war of the sexes. Millennials didn't just inherit general liberation, they inherited gender fatigue. A generation trying to evolve while secretly carrying masculine rage, disrespected, displaced, or economically cornered. Feminine mistrust, used, abandoned, or forced into self reliance. This creates a culture where women feel they can't relax. Men feel they can't win. Both feel unseen. Both feel blamed. And both retreat into performance, ideology, or avoidance. And because millennials are the receipts era generation, they don't just feel it, they research it, which means polarity collapse becomes content. Hot takes, trends, relationship coaches, online discourse, identity warfare. So a private wound becomes a public economy. This is a millennial polarity breakdown. Love became politicized, erotic, trust became rare, and intimacy got trapped between fear and optimization. Why men can appear to avoid consequences. We're just going to take a moment of silence. Why men can appear to avoid consequences. Because consequences are delayed or externalized, women and children absorb immediate damage. Courts move slowly, enforcement is weak, and caregiving creates immobility. So men can leave, start over, delay responsibility, and minimize visible impact. While women cannot exit, cannot delay, cannot disappear, cannot risk collapse. The system quietly rewards disengagement and punishes responsibility. So I intentionally put this portion at the end. This is for you. This is for the real ones. This is for the real ones. Why men disengage under this system. A structural map, not a character indictment. Indictment. Core thesis. Men disengage not because they are inherently worse, but because the modern system removed clear roles, delayed consequences, and severed effort from meaning while still granting access to intimacy and reproduction. When contribution is no longer required up front, women, this is your fault. And responsibility is enforced late or unevenly, disengagement becomes rational, even if destructive. The pendulum has swung. It really has, and it's unfortunate it had to get to this extreme. All right, so the provider role collapsed without a replacement. For most of history, male identity was anchored to provision and responsibility. What used to be true, providing equals status, marriage equals adulthood, fatherhood equals obligation, and failure equals immediate social consequence. What changed? One income no longer supports a family. Wages stagnated, jobs lost prestige and permanence, masculine worth tied to provision became unattainable. But instead of replacing the role, the system just removed it. So men were told, you're not needed as providers. You should be emotionally available instead, but still be confident, attractive, and decisive. And don't depend on anyone. That's not a role, that's a contradiction. When a role disappears, motivation collapses. Number two, responsibility became optional at the front end. This is critical and rarely said plainly. Historically, sex, historically, marriage, or I'm sorry, historically, sex from marriage expectation, pregnancy, forced responsibility, and community enforced consequences. A banging song just came on. Now, sex divorced from commitment, pregnancy responsibility delayed, legal enforcement slow and weak, social shame removed, exit available without immediate penalty. So the system accidentally taught you can participate without committing, you can leave and deal with consequences later, if at all. Meanwhile, women and children absorb immediate costs. Delayed consequences breed disengagement. The state replaced men, but only partially. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When men disengage, the state steps in just enough to prevent collapse, but not enough to create stability. That creates a perverse loop. Man disengages, women holds everything together. State provides minimal aid, child survives, man avoids full responsibility, and the pattern repeats. The system unintentionally says we've got it handled, don't worry. But it's women doing the handling. When institutions buffer consequences, individual accountability weakens. Male contribution became invisible or devalued. Another destabilizer. Men are told money isn't enough, presence matters more, be emotionally available. But there is no shared definition of what good fatherhood looks like, what fair contribution is, what leadership means, and what masculinity is for. So effort becomes risky, do too little, you're lazy, do too much, you're controlling, lead, you're oppressive, and withdraw, you're irresponsible. When every move is wrong, men stop moving. Ambiguity kills initiative. Dating apps removed the need to mature. This matters more than people admit. Dating apps decouple sex from responsibility, reward surface traits over reliability, allow endless novelty, and reduce social accountability. So many men can avoid growth, avoid repair, avoid long term investment, and still access intimacy. I'm trying not to dance. This is a banging song. I have to listen to music when talking about this freaking topic. It is I have my own personal journey with the masculine. My family is amazing. My father, my grandfather, all the men in my family has set the standard insanely high. I will just put it that way. Y'all, y'all, they just don't make men like they used to. All right, so why struggle became so many men can avoid growth, avoid repair, avoid long-term investment, and still access intimacy. Why struggle to become a husband or father when the system gives access without maturation? If growth is optional, many will skip it. Masculinity lost its developmental path. Historically, men became men through work, marriage, fatherhood, responsibility, and sacrifice. Now there is no shared rite of passage. Instead, men face endless adolescence, consumption based identity, pornified sexuality, down low culture. This isn't the place for this. I need to get this out of my system. As soon as I am done with this video, I am going to word vomit into my toxic masculine and toxic feminine series. I need to. This is therapy. All right, instead men face so endless adolescence, consumption-based identity, pornified sexuality, isolated achievement, and low relational accountability. Some step up anyway, many don't. The system doesn't require it. Without initiation, maturity stalls. I am not in the belief that all men are evil or bad. I just want to throw up because they're more few and far between. Why this is not men versus women. Men disengaging is not a win for men. Loneliness increases, meaning collapses, addiction rises, Schluer Schlide. Rates spike and resentment grows. Women disengaging is self-protection, not hostility. Both are responding rationally to a system that offloaded care, removed structure, privatized risk, and rewarded avoidance. Men did not become less capable. The system removed the conditions that once required responsibility while still granting access to intimacy. When provision lost meaning, consequences were delayed, and commitment became optional. Disengagement became adaptive. Women absorbed the fallout because children still need care. This is not a moral failure, it is a structural one. The hard truth underneath it all: men are disengaging because they are not required, not initiated, not held, and not needed until something breaks. Women are exhausted because they are required for everything, held accountable immediately, blamed for outcomes, and cannot opt out without harm to children. That asymmetry is the crisis. Women as the emergency infrastructure. When care became the last institution standing, women did not suddenly become leaders. They became the only remaining stabilizing force when every other structure withdrew. For most of human history, women have held society together in ways that were deliberately invisible, regulating children's nervous systems, maintaining daily continuity, absorbing emotional fallout, anticipating needs before they became crisis, and turning instability into routine. This labor was never optional, it was simply unnamed. What changed for millennials is not that women started doing everything, it's that the denial collapsed. Women are now expected to raise children, earn income, manage households, perform emotional labor, maintain sexual availability, regulate men's emotions, plan the future, and still be told they are not doing enough. All while the systems that once supported families, extended kin networks, affordable housing, stable wages, institutional care quietly disappeared. Women did not gain power. They inherited responsibility without authority. And responsibility without authority is not leadership, it is overload. The masculine container didn't transform, it withdrew. Historically, masculinity was not defined by emotional fluency, it was defined by containment. Material provision, physical protection, follow through, and structural reliability. As economics destabilized and institutions failed, that container thinned, but it was never consciously rebuilt. So women filled the gap. Not out of ideology, not out of superiority, out of necessity. Children still needed to be fed, bills still needed to be paid, homes still needed to function. And when men disengaged emotionally, economically, and relationally, women absorbed the consequences. This is the unspoken truth beneath modern gender conflict. Women didn't take over, they prevented collapse. Why women are burnt the F out. Burnout isn't just about ambition, it's about asymmetric consequences. When men disengage, they are framed as overwhelmed, depressed, or lost. When women disengage, children suffer, systems break, futures destabilize, and women are blamed anyway. So women keep going, not because they're stronger, but because the cost of stopping is catastrophic. This is why desire dies. This is why resentment builds. And this is why intimacy collapses. You cannot ask someone to lead, nurture, earn, regulate, and desire simultaneously, and then blame them when their body shuts down. Polarity breakdown diagram: how load imbalance kills desire. Old polarity, imperfect but functional. Masculine, external containment, provision, protection, and structural stability. Feminine, relational intelligence, care, emotional regulation, and cultural continuity. Desire flows because responsibility is distributed, polarity is complementary, and no one carries everything. Millennial reality, collapse phase. Feminine becomes economic provider, emotional regulator, planner, caretaker, stabilizer, and future holder. Masculine becomes optional, uncertain, delayed, resentful, or withdrawn. Result: women overfunction, men underorient, polarity inverts, desire collapses under exhaustion. Women become the emergency infrastructure. Leadership born of collapse is not liberation, it is survival. True repair point. Polarity is restored when containment is shared, responsibility is mutual, leadership rotates by capacity, not gender. Women can rest without collapse following. Repair and reorientation. I'm trying to hammer this whole thing through. All right, so what actually heals millennial repair? Or what actually heals millennial polarity without blame or fantasy? This is where most conversations fail. Repair is not women doing less without support, men being shamed into masculinity, nostalgia for patriarchy, and spiritual bypass about divine feminine. Repair is structural honesty. What repair requires from men, plainly. Men do not need to dominate, they need to be reliable. Repair requires men to develop internal containment, follow through without being managed, contribute materially and emotionally, accept responsibility without resentment, understand that provision is not just about money, it's stability. Masculinity becomes attractive again when it's predictable, not performative. Polarity does not return because men say the right things. It returns when women no longer feel they have to hold everything alone. What repair requires for women, equally plainly. Women do not need to shrink. They need to stop compensating for absence. This is rough. Repair requires women to stop overfunctioning to preserve connection, allow men to fail and self correct. That is really, really difficult for women with children. Release control that masquerades as safety. Stop equating leadership with worth. Let desire guide intimacy, not responsibility. This is not about softening, it is about not parenting your partner. Desire cannot survive caretaking. Raising children costs more now because housing is unstable, healthcare is expensive, education is privatized, time is monetized, and community support is gone. When fathers resist paying the true cost, what they're often rejecting is not money. They are rejecting acknowledgement of labor, the invisible labor, permanence of responsibility, and the reality of care as work. This erodes trust faster than infidelity because it says, I benefit from the outcome, but not the cost. No polarity survives that. Women didn't become leaders because they wanted power. They became leaders because collapse demanded someone hold the line. And their bodies are now done pretending this is sustainable. All right, so closing this section out, millennial gender conflict is not a war between men and women. It is a fallout of systems that failed and quietly handed the bill to women. Repair does not come from blaming either side. It comes from rebuilding containment, responsibility, and rest. So intimacy no longer has to function as emergency management. This is not regression. This is survival becoming humane again. All right, how many more pages do I have? My God, this is long. 168. I think we're almost done. Yep, I went hard on this one. It's hard not to. All right, so 168 is where I left off. I'm gonna start rapping. My playlist goes from like rock to rap to country to heavy metal. All right, so I need a break and I'm going to split this off because I probably have 20 more pages to go. And anywho, yeah, so I hope you are enjoying this video. I think this is, this excites me a lot. I enjoy the polarity work a lot. I know I'm like not looking at the camera. It's so weird. So yeah, anywho, I enjoy the polarity breakdown architecture, understanding polarity within personalities, within men, within women, within culture, within generations. What the hell happened to the masculine and feminine? That is like the most basic building block of society, of nature, of nurture. It's insane. It's just completely insane. So yeah, anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe. Feel free to leave a comment on your thoughts and feelings. I have not uploaded my book yet. I certainly have some editing to do. Yeah, I've noticed some corrections that I need to make. So I've not uploaded that yet, but I will very, very shortly. So anywho, take care, y'all, and I will see you in the next video.